two, three. Take me out to the ball game. Take me out to the crowd. Buy me some peanuts and Cracker Jack. I don't care if I ever get back. Oh, it's root for the Cubbies. If they don't win, it's a shame. For it's 1, 2, 3 strikes, you're out at the old ball game. Hey!
This is
on the 16th of the Monday Morning Quarterback from WBRN Radio and on the Boston Red Network. This is Boston Red in the Jerry Pippin broadcast booth. We always honor our late broadcast partner, Jerry Pippin, who was with us for many, many years providing the commentary. Nonetheless, Jerry has not been with us since 2015. But some of the stories, some of the events of body politic, the Affordable Care Act are with us, the legacy of Barack Obama is with us, and various other things within this coverage of the 50 continuous states and, of course, the international situation. Later today, there will be elections in Israel. The Zionists are having their elections. The Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu is running there. They have a parliamentary system. He came up short and had to call what's called a snap election. Also, there was an election in Tunisia. I believe they're down now to 2 candidates out of many there in Tunisia. We'll have more of that on a future program. Some of the things we are planning here, we've just about finished up the Edward Snowden production. Edward Snowden has a new book out. We'll talk about that in the production on Edward Snowden. So we'll look for that. That'll be out here. And we also will have this week the open source report. And Permanent Record is the title of his new book that is out. He has been 6 years out of the country in exile in the Russian Federation. And he does shed some light on the Russian Federation, the question of exiles period. What we've done is brought together several interviews he has done with the Guardian, the American Public Radio Network, and France 24. The better one is actually with France 24. But that is one of the things we are working on, and we are putting the wraps on the funeral of the late revolutionary freedom fighter, Pan-Africanist Robert Mugabe. We'll get that out also in this week cycle. But firstly, we will go to the United Auto Workers. Over 50,000 of them went on strike this morning against General Motors. They are very, very wide apart in terms of working conditions, various benefits they have enforced. For those that don't know the story of the United Auto Workers, during the Depression there was a campaign out there, and Barack Obama came in 2009, and he decided that he would save the automobile industry because it was very important to the American economy. Many in the opposite Republican Party opposed that. And of course, in 2012, when he ran against Willard Romney had opposed that. Willard Romney was at one time from Detroit, and he was born there in Michigan. His father was the governor of Michigan. Of course, he was governor of the Commonwealth here in Boston. But nonetheless, that was the story, and the UAW, of course, went through very rough times. Two-tier systems, etc., give-backs. And, of course, there was a history of give-backs before the Depression has, as they say, stained the UAW. In Michigan, the home to the UAW, is now a right-to-work state. that was voted in on the Republican legislature through gerrymandering, and they were under a governor named Snyder, Gateway Snyder, because he used to be the chief operating officer of Gateway Computers, a crappy computer. But nonetheless, this Etzel of the computer manufacturers ended up in the governor's chair in Lansing, Michigan, and things went to pot very, very quickly, literally. The state went right to work, and you could see the seeds of this coming in Michigan. Michigan had one of the highest numbers of militias. Conspiracy theories were running amok there. And one of the things you look to, these right-wing movements, whether it be the militias at the time, the Birches, etc., majority of the people involved in those movements are right-wing. And those are the people that form the base, the core base of DJ Trump's election. Now, there are other things out there that obviously played into that. A campaign that was run half-assed by Hillary Clinton, but at the same time in Michigan, she faced gerrymandering, voter irregularities in the city of Detroit, etc. So this was the reason DJ Trump was able to win the state of Michigan, the home of the Automobile Workers Union. And, of course, these theories from the birthers on, that is what set up this base, the Tea Party base amongst the same people. And, of course, now we understand that the Trump people have recognized that a percentage of people that have not voted, they are now outreaching to them in what we call persuasion and trying to persuade them to vote for DJ Trump. Now, the statistical fact is that many of the people that did not vote, that opposed the government as a government, period, are on the right, and if they can be persuaded to vote for DJ Trump on a smaller, quote-unquote, government platform. And this is something the Republicans, the Tea Party, which is created by a Republican consultant, in Alaska and various other places, that they tapped into this vein. So beware when you hear the flat earthers or these various other characters. Remember when we had the rebellions out in Nevada, the Bundy Farm, and in Oregon, these various militia groups that were coming. One thing they all had in common, they supported the capitalist system. They were not against the capitalist system. They were against the government. Now, there's a big distinction there. So this is the reason that the campaign staff of DJ Trump and its campaign manager there thinks that could be some fertile ground for them. They're also targeting in Florida people that have had their rights restored, what we call in the socialist movement and Marxist or lumpen proletariat, not to be trusted. So these are some of the marginal people that they can at least utilize for the 2020 election. And in 2016, they were trying to convince some of these people not to vote, particularly African Americans, to suppress the vote. Of course, they suppressed the vote by a number of laws. That happened in Texas and various other places. ID laws. We seen recently here in Ohio the purging of people from the voter rolls. That same thing happened in Georgia. Stacey Abrams is working on that issue in Georgia. Incidentally, while we're in Georgia, Mr. Alsop is running for governor. He ran for state representative there, and now he's running for governor. They tried to talk Stacey Abrams into running. She did not want to run. There, she feels that she can do better in a grassroots organization, and that is what she has. There are a lot of worthy grassroots organizations around. Bernie Sanders was in the College of Charleston on the campus organizing there, and also Bernie has shaken up his staff in New Hampshire. That he's getting people in there that actually know what they're doing. So you're going to see more and more of this coming about. Another developing story here, and we've been following it, is the Supreme Court Justice, now Mr. Kavanaugh, is back in the news. This is a New York Times story here on Kavanaugh and what happened in the 80s. This is Deborah Rumez. Her experience at Yale is so much about the college effects to diversify its student body. That was in the 80s. Brent Kavanaugh fit in with the privileged kids. She did not. This is their analysis from the Times, and this is by one of the authors, Kate Kelly, and Robin Progenovan, Ben, I suppose, there. The Education of Brett Kavanaugh, an investigator, the authors of a forthcoming book. Nonetheless, it's on the 14th. Deborah Rumez had grades to go to Yale. This is in 1983, but she wasn't prepared for what she'd find there. Top student in southwestern Connecticut. She studied hard, but socialized little. She was raised a Catholic, had a sheltered upbringing. In the summer, she worked at a Carvel dishing ice. At Carvel. Dishing ice cream, commuting in a $500 car she bought from babysitting. At Yale, she encountered students from a worldly background. Many were affluent and attended elite private schools. She also had experience with drinking and sexual behavior that Ms. Rumez, who was not intending to be intimate with a man until her wedding night, lacked. During the winter of her freshman year, a drunken fraternity party upset her deeply. Some of her classmates had been drinking heavily when she saw a freshman named Kavanaugh pull down his pants and thrust his weapon at her, prompting her to swat it away and inadvertently touch it. Some of the onlookers who have been passing around a fake one early in the evening laughed, fake penis actually. And we usually don't do this. This is kind of, it leads, it bleeds. Nonetheless, this was quite common in fraternity houses, not only at Yale, but across the country, particularly in the 70s and 60s. A fellow was telling me about an event at some fraternity house. I don't even remember what the university was. But Tina Turner was there, and of course Tina Turner was on stage dancing as she usually danced, and of course people were doing what Brett Kavanaugh did. Not to Tina. She said in the interview early this year at her Boulder, she lives down in Boulder, by appearing upon her in this way, she added, Kavanaugh and his friends made it clear, I am not smart. Kavanaugh, of course, is now a justice on the court, and of course he's denied the claims. Misconduct, this is from Christine Blasey Ford, had attended a Washington area high school near his. Ramaz's story would seem less damaging to Kavanaugh's reputation than those of Dr. Ford, who claimed he pinned her down, groped her, etc., etc. Ramaz this drive has occurred. It has been a talk of the campus. Our reporting suggests that several people, including her mother, heard about the incident. And this is a pattern in many of these incidents. Other people hear about them, but they never come to the greater public. We uncovered a previously on a reported story about Kavanaugh in his freshman year that echoes the allegations of Ramaz. Classmate Max, I think that is Stetter, it's Tiera, saw Kavanaugh with his pants down at a different drunken party where friends pushed his weapon, I suppose you'd call it, into the hands of a female student. Stetter, who runs a nonprofit in Washington, notified the Senate. There's an FBI, and of course he declined to discuss it. The Times has collaboration with two other officials who have communicated with that may be Stina. Anyway, Kavanaugh did not speak to us because we have not agreed on terms for an interview, but he denies the allegation of both women, Ramaz and Dr. Ford. In the 80s was the early stage of integrating more minority students in historically privileged. We use the word European male populations. The college admitted its first African student in the 1880s. By the time Ramaz was there, people of color comprised less than a fifth of the student body. Women who had been admitted for the first time in 1969 were still relatively newcomers to Yale. Yale is where, incidentally, Clarence Thomas came. The background of his father was a trade association executive. That's right, he's a trade association executive. And they lived in Bethesda, Maryland, owned the second house on the Maryland's East Shore. Kavanaugh was surrounded by the sons of powerful Washington professionals and politicians. Ramaz, of course, grew up in a working-class area in some place called Shelton, Connecticut, perhaps best known for producing the waffle ball, and didn't drink before college. Her father, who is a Puerto Rican, rose through the Southern New England telephone company, having started as a cable splicer. Her mother, who is French, so she had an interesting background, was a medical technician. Ramaz took pride in her parents' work ethic, enjoyed simple pleasures like swimming in an above ground pool, taking camping trips. She was studious, making her valedictorian at her Catholic school. Her parents took out loans to pay for Yale. She got work-study jobs on campus, serving food in the dining halls, cleaning dorm rooms before class reunions. She tried to adopt to Yale socially, joining the cheerleading squad. That was something that women did. But she learned very quickly that although cheerleading was cool in high school, it didn't carry the same at Yale. People called her Debbie cheerleader, Debbie dining hall, or something to say Debbie does. Anyway, that was Debbie Does Dallas. That was an X-rated movie. She was very innocent coming into college. Liz Switzer, who roomed with her for 3 years at Yale and now a physician in Seattle. I felt obligated early in the freshman year to protect her, and there are questions about her admission on the merits. It's because you're Puerto Rican, as someone once asked her. She also was ribbed for not being fluent in Spanish, Espanol. Anyway, they marked her knockoff black and red Air Jordans. Oh, well, that's okay. It wasn't until she got a call from a reporter and saw her account of Kavanaugh's as sexual misconduct. The campus of the 80s had yet to be gravitized by identity and sexual politics, no doubt about that. Years after graduating, however, she started volunteering with a non-profit organization that assisted victims of domestic violence, the Safe House Progressive Alliance for Nonviolent C-SPAN. She became a staff member for a time, continued to serve on this board. Gradually, she embraced her Puerto Rican roots. She had to go home. As to be her, anyway, we won't get into that part of it. Ms. Ramaz's legal team gave the FBI a list of at least 25 people who may have had collaborating evidence. The Bureau, in its supplemental background investigation, interviewed none of them. And this is what comes out in the case here. The Republican-controlled Senate imposed strict rules on limits there, and we had to wait to get authorization to do anything. That's Bill Pittard, one of the attorneys for Ms. Ramaz. Sheldon Whitehouse, Democrat, he's a Rhode Island member of the Judiciary Committee, later said, I would review the allegations as not having even remotely been investigated. Democrats agreed. Old Charles Grassley of Iowa, in the 80s, there's no collaboration of allegations by Ford of Ms. Ramaz. The committee, one of the closest votes in 130 years, 2 votes put, that was on October the 16th, 2018, put old Kavanaugh on the court. In open letter, more than 3,000 Yale women commending her courage in coming forward. More than 1,500 men issued a similar letter 2 days later. Let me finish this up here. And there's another article here in the Washington Post where several of the Democratic candidates are actually calling to be impeached, literally calling Kavanaugh. Democratic candidates demand Kavanaugh's impeachment after new allegations in the Times piece. Kamala Harris, she's in the mix there. Elizabeth Warren of the Commonwealth, and of course Julian Castro of San Antonio. He's a candidate there. Harris and had voted against Kavanaugh's confirmation process with Dr. Blasey Smith. Kavanaugh, of course, denied it. This is from the same old deal. Debates are reigniting this weekend with the Saturday evening publication of the Times piece. He was put on the court through a sham process, and of this place on the court's insult to pursuit of truth and justice. That is from Kamala Harris. Meanwhile, DJ Trump, lame media and Democrats working together to scare Kavanaugh into turning liberal. That's an interesting one. Trump said in one of his normal tweets, started suing people, that he should start suing people or the Justice Department. That's be interesting. A Supreme Court justice suing people. I guess he'd have to recuse himself from his own case. In a statement, old Mitch McConnell, otherwise known as Moscow Mitch, the far left's willingness to seize upon completely uncollaborated and unsubstantiated allegations during last year's confirmation process was dark and embarrassing chapter for the Senate. Fortunately, majority of the Senate is by 2. And American people rallied behind Kavanaugh. That was a lie in itself by 2 votes. Anyway, she was Ms. Ramez was a classmate of his at Yale and she was really never allowed to testify. She and the collaboration that she has, no doubt it will be revisited during the Senate testimony. Kavanaugh said if the incident described had occurred, it would have been a talk on the campus. Our reporting suggests it was. That is from Progenben and Kelly there. Reporters said at least 7 people they interviewed had heard about the incident, including the victim. We talked about that. From former Senator Claire McCaskill, she was from St. Louis. Said on Meet the Press that she's not sure how Democrats should proceed on the new revelations about the FBI background check, a lack thereof. That was such a mess. It's what did for those of us who were running. It's crystallized how bad Washington is. So if you were in Washington at the moment, frankly, the party, it didn't matter much as the facts that you were part of the mess. And the mess really occurred because the information that needed to be investigated came out so late. And then it's like a kneecap, even though there were reasons it was late. I'm not sure good ones. And then she goes on here, but the information had come early. But if the information had come early, I think you wouldn't have had such a fraudulent FBI investigation. But that isn't always going at the FBI. Never bothered to speak to people. Amy Klobuchar gets in this here with George Stephanopoulos, saying that she still opposed to Kavanaugh's confirmation, and there was a lack of it, and she's a former prosecutor. She would know of FBI investigation to allegations against him. My concern is that the process was a sham, and I don't think you can look at the impeachment hearing without getting the documents. The House would have to get the documents, and the Attorney General is shielding documents, Ms. Klobuchar said. This will be interesting in the next debate, how they will take this on. In other news, we've been looking at crude oil, of all things, jumped 12% because of drone strikes on a Saudi Arabian field that they used to say was invincible and no longer is. Prices jumped on the global market. That was Sunday night. From a wave of attacks, crude oil rose to $70 a barrel on futures. That's Brent crude, an 18% surge from the close. It was at 60.15 before falling back to about a 12% increase. U.S. benchmark, that's Texas Intermediate, was $61 per barrel. It climbed 12%. DJ Trump opened up the strategic reserves. He added that he told government agencies to expedite approval of the oil pipeline currently permitting process and text in various other states. That's not going to do it. And the problem has been the number of rigs themselves have went down because of pricing of the so-called shale oil. Anyway, it knocked out 5.7 million barrels. That's what Saudi stuff, 6%. I've seen the 6% and the 5% figure of the 100 barrels a day the world, 100 million barrels, that the world consumes. And so that's where Saudi Arabia, which is the second largest producer in the world at 9.85 million barrels per day. The Saudis are scrambling to make repairs and keep the oil flowing, but that is going to take some time to do. It's not like you can fix that in a day. Saudi officials said only a third of the affected 5.7 million would be restored by Monday, leaving millions of barrels offline indefinitely, with Venezuela and Iran are mostly absent from the world. The extended Saudi supply disruption could target individual economies such as the U.S. Of course, they've already tapped the emergency reserves. Those are called the strategic petroleum reserves. Currently holds 645 million barrels, equal to 1 month of the U.S. oil consumption. There are not going to be gas lines like in the 70s, no doubt about that, because of the in the 70s you had oil primarily out of OPEC, Saudi Arabia, and that area. You didn't have shale oil, which is lately pressurized out of the soil. Even though U.S. produced more oil than ever before, close to 12 million barrels a day, a disruption halfway around the world could send prices soaring. Americans are more insulated from those swings. U.S. shale oil production has reduced domestic demand from the purging up from 3 million barrels a day to now just 1 million now. In 2003, the U.S. economy is far less dependent on manufacturing. That's a very important situation there in the 70s and 80s. Oil companies are a smaller piece of the stock market. The energy sector comprises more than 20% of the Standard & Poor's 500. It was in the 70s. Now it's only 4.4 tenths there. So it went from 20% to less than 5%. Oil prices have been relatively calm in recent weeks. So that's basically where they are. Saudi Arabia has been the industry's a great stabilizer with $10 trillion worth of oil in its sands. But the kingdom and other members of OPEC have been only able to limit production enough to keep the prices within the sweet spot of they'd like to make $70, $80. So actually this is better, and the Russian Federation will do better because of it. Just check a minute here as we roll right along here. GM, this is on the 15th here, with the two sides still far apart. The strike began on this is UAW. Regional leaders in Detroit voted unanimously on Sunday to authorize the strike. And it is in motion now. And there's roughly 50,000 GM workers out there, plants across the country, walking off the job. This is the first such strike since 2007. That was before the Depression. The UAW is pushing a GM to improve wages, reopen idle plants, add jobs at others, and close the narrative difference between pay rates for new hires. That's the two-tier veteran workers. GM wants the workers to share a greater portion of healthcare costs. That has been a record going around to increase workforce productivity and flexibility in the plants. All the company has been earning substantial profits in North America. It is idled 4 of its plants in North America as car sales go slid. At the same time as the talks of federal corruption inquiry looking into at least 2 Fiat Chrysler executives. The investigation, the details there, and we've looked at some of this, including the president, Gary Jones. We won't talk much about that. But car makers' profits today are extracted from 2 challenges, as said Eric Gordon. He's at the University of Michigan's business professor who follows the auto industry. The makers will be going into a down cycle of demand in their two most important markets, and they will have to make bigger technology investments in their history to change to electric propulsion. Among its goals, the union is hoping to get GM to reopen an idle car plant. This is the one in Lordstown, Ohio, a goal that Trump has supported. The plant makes the Chevrolet Cruze, a compact car whose sales plunged 40%. And they went out in October. GM said it offered to make more than $7 billion in new investments in U.S. plants and add 5,400 jobs and increase salaries. We presented a strong offer on improved salaries. This is from GM. We have negotiated in good faith. They always say this. The company has enough inventory on dealers' lots to last 77 days at the current rate of sale. That's a long time. That's according to Cox Automotive. The union did not resort to nationwide strikes against GM when it negotiated contracts in 11 and 15. But that was just coming out of the Depression. Its members walked out of GM plants for 3 days in 2007 before a deal was reached. GM employs 49,000 full-time workers and temporary workers. UAW members fewer than the number employed at Ford and Fiat. GM has a smaller UAW workforce than its rivals because a large portion of its vehicles made in North America are assembled in Mexico, with the prospect of a strike for at least temporarily taking the spotlight off the union's problems. In 2017, 9 people were charged in connection with a variety of schemes in which union money was allegedly used for extravagant spending. That story was in CNBC. We looked at it. And federal agents raided homes of various people. Here we won't go into that, but they did. A senior union official who worked closely with Jones was charged. This guy's name is Vince Pearson, with embezzling money, embezzlement, money laundering, wire fraud, the whole 9 yards there. And spending union funds on luxury villas in Palm Springs, California. Golf clubs, clothes, expensive champagnes, liquors, and cigars. Boy, the whole 9 yards. So that's the story there. We've had that. We used to have the union corruption stories under the Teamsters, when the Teamsters were out there. It was one of those things coming forward, period. And in coal country, the women went to work and the world changed from 2010. We'll cover the story later. To 2017, Letcher County in Kentucky saw a greater shift in gender balance in its workforce than almost any other county in the U.S. And we'll have to cover that story. We'll get to it. It's from the Times and some of the things here. Let's move on here. This is all from the L.A. Times. We like to go out west occasionally. Democrats head towards a 3-person race while the second tier scrambles. And this is the L.A. Times on the 13th of September. Sprawling Democratic field has been headed towards a 3-person race. They hope. If you notice, the monopoly media has been pushing this. It shouldn't be surprising that the 3 candidates have risen to the top for more than from 20. There were 20 candidates. Not surprising the fact that in a campaign that started with parties penchant to for youth and diversity. The problems. Some say the second-tier candidates haven't had solid attention-grabbing campaign moments and have been unable to translate into doable political game. Thursday in Houston, we covered that, read some of the transcript. It won't be clear for a week or so whether any of these rivals had a true breakout moment. Amy Klobuchar sought to open a moderate alternative to health care, guns, tax policies advocated by Bernie and Liz Warren. She declared that Medicare for all is a bad idea. I think Senator Klobuchar will regret making that comment. We'll see. Julian Castro repeatedly took it. Joe Biden bluntly suggesting that he was losing his memory And Senator Booker of New Jersey, he's still running around with common causes and common purposes, rather than the Democrats trying to demoralize and degrade each other. I don't think anybody was listening to that. The results was elaborate praise on Sanders for having pioneered Medicare for all. And while the candidates all labored to draw distinctions amongst themselves, they also leveled the debate with more kind words for one another than previous confrontations. They figured out they have to have something here. And the recipients of that, of course, is Bernie Sanders and Beto O'Rourke. Warren, for her part, aimed her criticism at corruption and the political system, not her rivals. Very, very smart there, though she's yet pull out her own detailed plan for health care coverage. Don't worry, she'll have one. Sanders focused more on drawing distinctions with Biden, saying that they were on opposite ends of trade and the Iraq War. For the first time, Biden appeared on the same stage with Warren. Harris focused on Trump, which is smart. O'Rourke is still struggling to highlight the kinds of sparks that drew him acclaim in 2018. Well, a little different situation there. And what else? I'll finish this up. But in the 5 months since Biden announced his candidacy, he's maintained his polling position in the front runner despite everything. Well, he doesn't have a whole lot to think about there. We'll head over to the Washington Post here and briefly something about his debate performance. This is by Margaret Sullivan. She's writing on the 13th. Now, this is crazy. Old Chris Chilizer, Biden was strong in presidential, though not flawless. He was only strong because the others were weak. Proclaimed Biden the main winner of the third debate. This is Looney Tunes. Margie O'Reilly, the editor of Commonwealth magazine. Well, not so much. And, of course, if you did the transcripts, Biden friends, please read this. He can't do it. Your prince is another castle. And anyway, I guess her situation there. And the true response below is in some of Bizarre Answers Hall of Fame here. Max Coleman, a PhD student in sociology, University of Indiana, tweeted, when asked what to do about the legacy of slavery, Biden said, we should bring social workers, into African American homes to deal with how to raise children. How is this disqualifying? Yeah. Anyway, Dan Balls of the Washington Post said Biden had the kind of evening he needed. He delivered the kind of performance that his supporters have been waiting for. Oh boy. Combative when needed and in the thick of the action throughout. And over at Fox News, and analyst there, Doug Shoreham, was Biden was a big winner. That's at Fox News. The former president made a much-needed display of strength and preparedness. Preparedness for what? He called Bernie Sanders president. He was compelling, convincing, and delivered his core message of restoring and protecting and rebuilding President Obama's record, including himself in it. Anyway, it's ridiculous to describe Twitter, anyway. Granted, there was far from a complete agreement on his big win. Nate Silver, I guess he got into it, calling the whole debate a bit of a letdown, offering his own on the former president. As for patterns in previous debates, Biden started out fairly strong, got worse as the night went on, and the evening will probably be most remembered for his rambling answer to the moderator's question about slavery. I don't know. I read it, I didn't even remember that. Anyway, goes around and around. This is Sullivan of the Washington Post. Let me run around here and get a little bit. I don't know if we'll do this one or not. This is the American veterans' experience in post-9/11 generation. For many veterans, combat experience strengthened them personally, but also made the transition to civilian life difficult. This is on the 10th of September. This was put out here through the Pew people. Roughly three quarters of U.S. veterans were deployed at least once, compared with 58% of those who served before them. And 9/11, post 9/11 veterans, about twice as likely as their pre-9/11 counterparts to have served in a combat zone, because they're more likely to have been deployed and to have have seen combat. Post 9/11 veterans are also likely to bear the scars of battle, while physical or not. Roughly half of them had emotionally traumatic or distressing experiences related to their military service, and a third say they sought professional help to deal with. An additional 36% said regardless of whether they had sought help, they think they had suffered from PTS, post-traumatic stress disorder. That's a new Pew survey of U.S. veterans. Thinking about their service, the majority of veterans expressed pride. Still, those who served post 9/11 are somewhat less likely than their predecessors to say they frequently felt proud after leaving the service. That is 58% to 70%. Many veterans, the impact of the war has felt beyond their tour and carries into the transition from military to civilian life. At the same time, those who served in combat report positive impacts from their experience. The majority said their experience in combat made them feel closer to those who served alongside them. That was the same in Vietnam. Most veterans say their training prepared them for military life. For military life, few say the military prepared them for what came next. That was after it. While veterans across the era offer similar evaluation of their job, the military did not prepare them for civilian life. For post 9/11 veterans are much more likely than those who served before them to say their readjustment to a civilian life was difficult. Post 9/11 veterans say it was somewhat or very difficult for them to readjust to a civilian life. Some of the challenges facing transition could be financial, emotional, professional. About a third of veterans said they had trouble paying bills in their first few years after leaving the military. Roughly 3 in 10 said they received unemployment compensation. 1 in 5 said they struggled with alcohol or substance abuse. That'd be 20%. Veterans have an emotional traumatic experience related to military service and more likely than those who did not report experiencing it. Veterans. Public say most Americans look up to people who serve in the military. Majority associate discipline and patriotism with veterans. Veterans view themselves as distinct from other Americans in some ways, but not in all. Majority amongst veterans, 61%, and the general public, 64%, said America looks up to people who have served in the military. Only about 1 in 10 veterans, 9%, or even a smaller share of all adults, say most Americans look down on people who served. That was not the case in the Vietnam era. People did look down on you. In fact, veterans overwhelmingly see themselves as more disciplined than those who have not served in the military. Some 84% of all veterans say this characteristic best describes those who served in the military than those who have not. Most Americans, 67%, agree with the assessment. About 1 in 4 amongst the public say that being discipline does not have much to do with whether one served in the military or not. I agree there. Similarly, a large majority of veterans, 71%, said the term patriotism better described those who served in the military than those who did not. 59% of the public share this view. So only those that serve in the military can be patriotic. This is strange. Anyway, veterans and the public are less likely to associate certain negative characteristics of those who served. Some 13% of veterans, 25% of the public say being emotionally unstable better describes those who served in the military than those who did not. Most in the group say this doesn't have much to do with having been in the military. A large majority of veterans endorse military as a career choice. Roughly 8 in 10 said they would advise young people close to them to join the military, including a large majority of post-veterans, combat veterans, those who say they have had emotional traumatic experience. The public even divided. 45% of all Americans say they would advise a young person close to them to join the military. I definitely would not. 50% said they would not there. My little brother was in the military for 20 years. Anyway, this is 1,284 U.S. veterans, including 797 veterans who only served prior to 9/11. That's 2001, and 487 post 9/11 veterans who served after 9/11. Was how it was set out there. Amongst veterans who were deployed at least once, post 9/11 veterans are more likely than pre to report certain positive and negative consequences of deployment. 2/3 of the post 9/11 veterans said being deployed had a positive impact on their financial situation, compared with 31% of pre 9/11 veterans. At the same time, 42% of post, that's before, after 9/11, but only 17% of pre said being deployed had a negative impact on their mental health. Government assistance, the majority of veterans, 64% said the government has given them and veterans as much help as it should have. 30% said it has given them little help. Post 9/11 veterans are more likely than those from previous eras say the government has given them less help than they should. 43 to 27. Most veterans, 73%, said they received benefits from the Department of Veterans Affairs when asked to assess the job the VA is doing, meeting their needs. Fewer than half of all veterans say the VA is doing an excellent good job. Post-military employment, 1 in 4 veterans say they have a job lined up when they left the military. Roughly half, 48%, said they looked for a job right away. It depends on when they left. And 21% said they looked for a job, but not the right one. 5% said they didn't find one. Didn't look for one, I'm sorry. About half of the veterans said they enrolled in school after leaving the military. Post 9/11 veterans are more likely than others to say they enrolled full-time, 36 plus 24, and a significant share of posts after 9/11 veterans, 42%, worked in civilian jobs after leaving the military. Said they believed, and based on their experience, skills, and training, they were overqualified for their post-military jobs. 56% said they stayed on their first job more than a year. So in other words, they were more qualified there. And let's do the numbers. I thought we were going to do, well, anyway, we'll do the numbers. I thought we were going to do, and we're not going to do her, I suppose. She was writing in the Wall Street Journal, and we didn't get her in. For some reason, I'm not finding her. Anyway, sometimes things elude us. Here that we had it up to look at it. Now it has disappeared from us. We spent a great deal of time, incidentally, on Friday Java and the week that was talking about healthcare. You can tune into those events and you will find those out there. And let me see if Peggy Nguyen, who was here. I don't know. We have time for Peggy. Maybe we'll. Everyone knows the truth about politics. Democrats are scrambling. Trump is a screwball, and the sane center is getting ignored. Everyone knows everything. Anyway, Burnham's Law. James Burnham was significant in the mid 20th century. A public intellectual of political philosopher, who started out on the left as a young follower. He carried an extremely personal correspondence with disgraced Soviet leader Leon Trotsky, and became an equally elaborate foe of totalitarianism and whatever manifestations. While at the National Review, oh boy, he gave his colleagues 10 maximum laws about the reality of life. 5 is wholly true, and whatever there's prohibition is a bootlegger. Anyway. In personal appearances, Burnham's number 1 law suggests that you can't successfully or forever conceal anything bad about yourself or your nature. For instance, everyone knows Trump can be taken in 220, but everyone doubts the ability of the current field to do it. Someone knows Elizabeth Warren has successfully created, everyone knows, has created an inhabited persona and high energy fighter on full of plans and is killing at it. She knows she has gone too far left for the general electorate and will introduce nuances. Well, okay. Everyone knows that happens all the time. The Democrat moderates are going nowhere, cluttered on the stage. Joe Biden may have 30% of the poll, but that means all the other candidates have his left have 70%. Biden's a front-runner status as a perceived moderate changes his platform daily, no doubt about that. Still will be rude. Everyone knows DJ Trump is a mental case, including, I believe, DJ Trump. While he doesn't keep insisting he is, extremely stable genius. Anyway, it would be nice to say, but I don't mean mental case. I mean his mind is a TV funhouse. Oh boy. He fires his third national security advisor by Twitter. Well, that's not unusual there. They have apparently argued that the president was going to invite the Taliban, a band of gangsters, to Camp David after the 9/11 during the celebration, where the FDR met with Churchill. Reagan walked with Thatcher. No one knows what history ISIS is going to do. No one knows the American people would do it. No one who felt 9/11 in their bones would do it. Well, anyway. But by my observance, something is going on with Trump supporters. They now concede much more about him in private than they did in the past. They use words like unpredictable, emotional. The most frequent public defenders now believe he's a screwball. Well, great question is who's got the most time, who's got a good shot, and those things are rarely important as they seem at the moment. The real question is, do the candidates in rows of podiums show any sign they are aware of they are going too far left? Maybe a little. There seems to be some recalibration. No bravely declares of their outlaws all private insurance. Warren, in fact, repeats and blazingly ducks the question. It must be shown in polls that telling 100 million people you're going to take away their insurance. Well, first impression was that so many of the candidates are so much accustomed to TV performances with such rounds. Pressed sentences are dramatically delivered. It's hard to remember but JFK and Nixon were a little shy to be on TV in the 60s debate, and a little formal. Jimmy Carter, too, 20 years later with Reagan, had a certain muted tone. Up until 2000 or so, national TV was a place where you would appropriately feel nervous. No longer you feel nervous, of course. If you're anyway, Warren was relatively quiet, almost recessive, but during the first half and emerged unscathed as Bernie and Biden went after each other. Biden was fine as Mr. Sanders spoke, and in his wide and randy way. And I remember something thing that worked against you is always that what works for you. He comes across like your angry Mitrovich, your uncle, in the attic. Mitrovich, excuse me. But like that uncle, he means what he says and is sincere and convinced, and it has its own power. I'm closing with the last thing everyone knows, and if they only think a minute, we would talk about politics. We are all obsessed on alt-right and progressive left of these peas in sick pawn, and one speaks of the center, which is vast and has something neither way left nor way right, and it is motivating love for America itself, not for obstructions, ideology, and theories of the case. As a group, they are virtually ignored, yet they are the center of everything. They include those on the left who are no longer comfortable in the new progressive party. Boy, she's doing a lot of editorializing there. The right is not comfortable with Trump or with decisions or approaches of the Bush era. They include those going on EID, extreme ideological discomfort. This cycle, they continue to be greatly ignored, and everyone knows it. Well, perhaps they should be. Let's do the scores here. That's Peggy Newland, one of our favorite conservatives, I guess you'd say, anyway. Was. I guess she got ousted from the CBS program. Anyway, nonetheless, the Red Sox were in the city of brotherly love. Sox 6-3 over the Phillies. The Yankees were in Toronto. Toronto 6-4. The Orioles 8-2 over the hapless Tigers. Cleveland 7-5 over the Twins. The Nationals win one, shut out the high-flying Atlanta 7-0. The Astros 12-3 in Kansas City. The Brewers had a day finally in St. Louis 7-5. Brian Braun hit a go-ahead grand slam off of Junior Fernandez with 2 outs in the ninth. Anyway, Rizzo came alive against the Pirates. It didn't matter. The score was 16-6. The Cubs had 19 hits, 1 error, and 16 runs, and the Pirates 6 hits and 6 runs, 14 hits. Boy. The Athletics and the Rangers in Texas. The Athletics 6-1. They're trying to get to the wild card there. Marcus Seaman, anyway, whatever he did. And the Padres and Rockies in Denver. It was the Rockies. 10-5. The Giants in San Francisco 2-1 over the Marlins. The Angels in Southern California playing the Rays. 6-4 was the score there. The D-backs lost to the Reds 3-1 in Arizona. And the Mariners 11-10, high-scoring game there. The Mariners had 17 hits, 2 errors, and the White Sox 11 hits and 1 error, and that is the end of that particular situation there. I don't know if we'll be able to snatch a college ball here or not. Sometimes we are, sometimes we aren't. You just never know. We'll see if we can get the college football scores over the weekend. We don't do the NFL here. This is week 3 of the college football scoreboard. Top 25, incidentally, here that we're doing. So we'll explain to where we are. And as we wait for that to come up, Ohio State now has the third best chance to reach the playoffs. Okay. Here we go. The University of Washington, number 20. We're at Houston, Washington, 31-24. Number 1, Clemson and Syracuse. And they showed they were 41-6 over Syracuse. Bama, 47-23 over South Carolina. Georgia, 55 and shut out Arkansas State. LSU 65-14. This looks like basketball scores. Oklahoma playing at UCLA 48-14, and they are number 5. Ohio State number 6 51-10 over Indiana. Notre Dame 66-14 over New Mexico. They're number 7. Kent State and Auburn was Auburn 55-16. Florida number 9 and Kentucky 29-21. Idaho State and Utah, Idaho State was shut out, and Utah 31. Texas 48-13 over Rice. Penn State, number 13, 17-10 over Penn. The Oregon Ducks destroyed Montana 35-3, and Texas A&M 62-3 over Lamar. Lamar should have stayed home. UCF, there's 45-27 over Sandra Booker's old school. And Arizona State upset Michigan State 10-7. Iowa and Iowa State, a 1-point game there. It was Iowa 18-17, and Iowa is number 19. It used to always be Iowa State in the old days. Temple in Maryland, 20-17 Temple. Boise State in Portland State, it was Boise State 45-10. The University of Washington, 52-20 over Hawaii. And in a final overtime, BYU best. USC, O.J. Simpson, old University, 30-27. And finally, Virginia, let's see, what do they have? 31 to 24 over Florida State. Virginia was 25. And that does it for the sports, and it will do it for us on the Monday Morning Quarterback, the 16th of September, 2019. We'll see you later. We'll have an open source production here on WBRN, and we'll bring Ed Snowden, the All-American Hero, with a special program on that. And we'll also have Robert Mugabe's funeral on BR on the World. That's our international channel. We'll start using it more. Ed Snowden will put him on that also. Good day.